I am so excited to have you on the show and to be able to see your gorgeous face and celebrate all of your wins again. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me, Gigi. I'm fantastic and I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, and it's been a little while since we last talked, and I've just really truly enjoyed seeing your continued evolution. You're one of those people that when you first come around you, it's kind of man, she's there, like she did the thing. And then you go on and you find yourself another cliff and you go higher. And then it's like, holy crap, she just did that. Did you guys see? She just did that. And then you're like, that's it, man. Like and then you go and you do something else, and you're just like, I love watching your continued success and your continued growth in all areas of your life. What do you think it is about you that gives you that momentum to
Hmm.
continue wanting to expand?
I've found that there's this weird thing that happens when you're operating in alignment where things happen for you versus you having to like struggle to create opportunities. And I feel like I've been living that existence for a bit at this point. And I have to think that a lot of it comes from the fact that I just am very clear on the vision and operate in that manner. And so it just happens. And I think that sounds a little like woo woo or like manifestation type. But for me, I'm just like, no, when you get good at really being clear on why you're doing what you're doing and you make decisions based on that instead of falling for the pressure of society or your family or whoever else that is not you, I think that's when people see like those folks who are out here in the world that are very aligned. So
I
I like
love
to think
that.
that I've gotten good at being that.
I love that. And I think that that's such a key topic also because you mentioned two different things. You mentioned being clear with your why, and then you mentioned something, there's like something else in there about like what we're told our why should be, right?
Mhm.
And so I feel like there's also a certain level of like introspection and inner knowing and like fuckery that has to happen in one's life to be able to spot the difference, right? Because I feel like especially those of us that are immigrants or first generation Latinas, you just want to make the money,
Mm.
right? But you and I both know that making the money ain't enough.
It's really not at all. It is not enough. And I had this idea in my head that I needed to make six figures by the time I was 30, and that was going to be the key to happiness. And all my issues, all my dissatisfaction was going to disappear. And I was just making more money and feeling more trapped at that point when that happened because, again, I was not listening to what I really wanted to do. I was still listening to the pressures of, oh, well, you're the first daughter and you're the first woman to go to college and you've made it your way up the career ladder and now you're working for Fortune 500 companies. Why should you question if that's what should make you happy when everybody's told you otherwise, right? And so then there's like this existential crisis that comes up because you realize money is never going to be enough. It has to be beyond that. It has to be you're fulfilling your purpose. You feel inspired by the work that you're doing. You are excited to get up every day. And I've realized now like there's just no amount of money coming from a source that is not aligned with who I want to be that is going to be enough for me to force it.
Yeah, I love that because you're absolutely right. I mean, we're not the only ones who've been at the very highly coveted six-figure mark, and then you
Right.
still feel miserable. You still feel empty. You still feel like, what am I even doing this for? Right.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to that part of evolving as a person and as an individual, right? Because I feel also like us in our Latina cultures, we're so deeply intertwined and tied into our family that sometimes even having an individual thought feels like you're doing something wrong.
Mm.
So, what would you say is a recommendation, right, for the person who's currently on that fence of like, some of the stuff that my family's telling me just don't vibe with me. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not feeling that way. There's something more for me. I want more out of life, right? I want more money or more time. What recommendation do you have for that person that's on the fence to be able to lovingly detach from that weight of the family opinions and to truly find what their thing is, right?
Mm.
Like what the why specifically.
Yeah.
What would you say to that person?
So I think it requires you to rediscover your voice. I think oftentimes, especially as women, we lose our ability to hear our inner voice and to trust your gut and to even like know what your intuition is telling you. So I think a lot of that work for me has come from personal development. You know, I'm a self-help a fanatic. I love just like working on the mindset and learning about boundaries and how to practice those and how to say no. And I think it's also required me to get more of like a thick skin of being okay with disappointing people and understanding that somebody else's vision is not meant to be yours. You know, at the end of the day, we have to remind ourselves like we have one shot at this thing called life. And you can wake up 20, 30, 40 years down the road if you're not being intentional about the decisions that you're making and not even recognize the life that you're living. And you're going to feel like you were fulfilling somebody else's dream and expectation. And I know what that feels like. And I know what it looks like to be okay with disappointing people and them not getting it. You know, I think oftentimes we really care so much about the opinions of others, which, if you think about our biological makeup and just like as a human species, to make decisions that potentially isolate you from your community, your brain's telling you, like, oh my God, I'm going to be alone. I'm not going to survive. Like, everybody's going to leave. And we have to understand how the mind works in order for us to be cognizant of when those things come up and realize like you making a career change is not going to mean you're going to die. You telling your parents, you know what? I'm not really interested in getting married or having kids or whatever it is that they're like trying to shove down your throat. You're going to be all right. But what you will not be all right with is making decisions that are not yours, that you do not own and that you feel obligated to achieve.
I love that. One of the things you talk about in your book, which is amazing, and I just want to point out, just in case there's anybody listening to this who has not read the book yet, this is not this is not a storytelling book.
No.
This is an actionable manual to really get your hands delightfully dirty with your money. So I absolutely love how practical each chapter is, how it literally is not just like, I made all this money and I'm so cool. And here's my story, my sob story about all the bad things that happened. And then how great and I overcame it in the end. No, it's like all this shit happened and here are the tools I used and here's how you can use them. And
Yeah.
then all this shit happened. And here's the tools I used and how I overcame and how you can use them. And you just, it's so beautiful. And one of the things you talk about is you found your fire when you lost your job. But fire has a different meaning than I've ever read before. So can you elaborate a little bit on what that true fire is and how can we find it if we have not been fired?
Mm. The whole concept of like financial independence and early retirement for me is still like a very novel concept because it's not something that I even knew was possible. You know, a lot of the times we're told you have to wait until 65 to retire. And so when I started hearing about these stories where people were opting out of the workforce in their 30s and 40s, I'm like, excuse me, what? Like, why didn't I learn about this? And, it corresponded also when I started learning about this movement with me getting laid off and realizing how precarious our financial situations can be when we're only relying on a single income source. And so for me, it was a rude wake up call when I got laid off back in 2014 because I had followed the script. I was like, I went to college, I got a master's, I work in a quote unquote stable engineering job. What's going on? Why am I getting fired? This is not supposed to happen to people like me. And I think for me that was like the huge wake up call that I never want to be in a position where somebody has the ability to just pull the rug out from under me. That feels very out of control. And as a type A personality, I was not vibing with that idea. And so that kind of set me on the trajectory to really diving into the world of financial independence and entrepreneurship and realizing that we have the ability to create unlimited amounts of income. And it starts with understanding that a lot of what we're told and the way that we're programmed as a society is to just get a job and work for somebody else and go make somebody else rich. And that for me has been the way that I've struggled, the way that I've lived paycheck to paycheck, even after making six figures. It's been the way that has held me back versus me finding my own creativity and realizing that there are ideas that I can come up with that become money printing ideas and I can become an unlimited source of income. That's what drives me going forward now. And I've experienced in real time like what that level of freedom looks like. And I don't think I could ever go back, honestly. I really feel like there's no amount of money that somebody could pay me to like work for someone else, because it's just so much more than about the money. It is about the options that you get. It is about knowing that you can create your reality and you're not having to wait for somebody to give you permission to live that reality. There's something very liberating about finding out that you are the maker of your own destiny, but you have to make that decision first.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that because you're absolutely right. There comes a point in the freedom that you have when you can decide when, what, where, and with who,
Hmm.
that you'll never want to ask for time off again. Like,
No.
who owns my time? The only person who owns my time is God, and he don't care what I do with it. 'Cause he's bringing me up when he decides he's bringing me up anyway.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
what are we talking about here? But there's something else that I really, really loved about your book. That is one of the things that threw me off. Like it startled me. And I am not easily startled. I, like you, am also a self-help and like always looking to challenge my thoughts and all these things. And there was a part in your book where you talk about financial trauma
Mm,
and you list what financial trauma looks like. And I know what the word trauma means, right? But when I was reading what it means in your book, I was startled because to me, that was the norm.
mm,
That's just how I grew up.
yeah,
That's not trauma.
right.
That's my childhood. And it took me a minute to be like, yes, all those things that I've studied and learned about, like mindset and how your reality creates, how your experiences create your reality, and all these things. And I'm like, it's so wild how what you have experienced becomes the definition of this is normal.
Yeah.
Poverty is normal. Overworking is normal. Working extra time for sometimes not getting paid time and a half is normal.
Mhm.
You know, I think some people really struggle getting out of that because they don't even realize that this is not normal.
Yeah.
What would you say is a tool that we can use outside of your book, because your book really is a phenomenal tool.
Thank you.
But what does it take for someone to really come to accept that how it was is so easy to break and to recreate the moment you believe that you can?
Therapy, I mean, I think we all need a therapist. Imma say that right now, and if
I
you're
got mine
triggered
all to
by that,
myself.
it is what it is, you know what I'm saying? Like, I've talked to so many people on my show that are navigating all types of aspects when it comes to financial trauma. You might be like the first kid to make it out of the hood and you're making six figures and you're living a good life. And then you go back to your family's house. They live in Section 8 housing and you're just like, oh my God, like I want to do more. But then you feel this pressure because you want to make sure your oxygen mask is on, right? So there's a lot of emotions that come with being on the other side of this. The struggle is something that we're familiar with, and it almost feels like more comfortable than being on the other side because there's so much less representation of what that looks like, and I always say, I want to live to like millionaires that are Latina, that are women of color. Like, where
Yeah.
are the normal millionaires, the ones that are not J Lo and Cardi B, that are not twerking on the internet for money? Like, where's the Latina business owners and the Latina real estate investors and the Latina entrepreneurs? Those are the people that I want to know. And there's still so much of that feeling of otherness when we think about what it looks like to be wealthy in our community. And so I think for me, it's been therapy too, just confronting those limiting beliefs that you have, whether you're afraid to negotiate because you saw maybe somebody took a risk with a business when you were a kid and it failed, and so you're like, well, I'm never going to open a business, or I'm never going to negotiate for more pay because that's risky activity and it could put me in financial jeopardy. Or you have been told that investing is gambling, and so you're hoarding money in a bank account, or even worse, like under the mattress, because you're afraid of it doing something that you don't understand. So I think there's just a lot of different ways that trauma can show up for us subconsciously typically, and unless you work with a professional, whether that is a financial coach or a therapist. There are now financial therapists, which I'm loving to see. People are becoming more and more cognizant of the relationship between your mental health and your money, because at the end of the day, your money's only going to do what your mind tells it to do. And if it's telling it to do some wacky ass shit, that's exactly what you're going to end up doing.
I'm gonna need you to hook me up with one of those therapists because I would love to have her on the show.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I've had like mental health experts on the show that just talk like, regular therapy, but I had no idea that there was something like what was it? What did you call it?
Financial trauma coaches, that's a thing.
Financial trauma. I need a contact because I
Yeah,
have to have them on the show. I think this is so powerful.
for
And
sure.
this leads me to my next question. You talk about something called being financially unfuckwithable, right? Which is kind of like what you're talking about now.
Yeah.
So good in the book. And one of the things that you just mentioned right now is like your ability to negotiate your pricing and things like that. I have a lot of entrepreneurs who listen to this podcast, and I know that they know because I know many of them personally, the phenomenal transformation that their business, that their service offers people, but they can't fucking price it right.
Yeah.
Right. And they keep underpricing, lowballing, and then of course, as you well know, because I think we've all been through this, when you underprice just for the sake of getting the client, you end up eventually resenting the client because you're giving so much more than the return that you deserve, right? Like
Yeah.
the energetic financial return that you deserve for the transformation that you're offering. What would you say to that person? What do you really think is holding these people back when they know that their offer, their transformation is amazing and they still can't price it?
Well, I think part of it has to do with the fact that when we learn about money, it's usually you're exchanging time for money. It's X amount of dollars per hour. And so it's very hard for people to visualize how to price something that does not correlate with that. And I like to teach my clients as well, you should not be charging by the hour. You should be charging based on the amount of time, energy, resources that you are saving your client, on the level of transformation, how much further are you getting them to where they want to be because of the skill set that you are sharing with them, right? And so I like to start with, if the price does not make you uncomfortable, it's probably not high enough. Okay, that's like a baseline for me. If the price makes you be like, oh my God, who the hell does she think she is? I think that's when you have started to scratch the surface of what is potentially possible. And I've also found that the less you charge, you attract pickier, more annoying clients.
Mm.
And I don't know if that, it has to be an energetic thing, but I have found that the client that you like try to, take on for $100, $200 is going to ask you to do so much more work than the client that you ask like $1,000 or $2,000. Because I think at that point, once you've gotten to the place where like you're comfortable in your pricing, you tend to attract people who are also more confident in your skill set versus you kind of having that like very small energy. I think people pick up on that, and you attract people who have that same small energy. So for me, it's just very important to feel, especially if you're an entrepreneur, like you have to think about all of the things that you've given up as part of a quote unquote stable career, stable job. You've given up access to a company match in your 401k. You've given up access to healthcare. You've given up access to maybe subsidies for childcare, etc. You need to be pricing all of that in to make your business actually sustainable. And that's why your prices need to be higher than you think, because you are trying to replace a lot of stuff that your job was subsidizing for you.
I love that. And you mentioned something that's really, really valuable there. And that is when you're in the process of that pricing, if it doesn't make you uncomfortable, it's probably too low.
Yeah.
It's probably too low. And that second guessing element, like I also think it happens to, we need to constantly be in a position of self expansion also, because when we price, like in the beginning of the services that we're offering, you price at a certain point and that feels kind of good, and that's okay. You're getting started. But if you're not elevating your service, if you're not continuing to grow as a person, if you're not polishing your tools, if you're not learning new ways and investing in your own knowledge and your own ability to really increase your delivery, your transformation, the impact that you can create for your clients, it's really easy for you to struggle with pricing more because
Yeah.
now you've been in business for 2 to 3 years, 4 years maybe, and you haven't really increased yourself. And that is also as a person, right? Something as simple as get out of your house. Go talk to somebody new. Make a connection with somebody who makes 3 times more money than you and have conversations literally about grabbing coffee. And just that conversation will show you how much room there is for expansion in your life as a person. And all of that reflects in your entrepreneurial life inevitably because business and entrepreneurship are directly connected.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also requires us to reprogram ourselves from the idea that like you need to work more to make more,
Mm.
because I make so much more money as an entrepreneur than I did when I started 11 years ago. And I work a lot less because I've gotten really good at identifying those high return on investment activities. I've gotten good at outsourcing shit that I know needs to be done, but it does not need to be done by me. And I price myself at a point where, a couple gigs a month are enough to pay my bills and then some, versus like taking on scraps and trying to piece together this paycheck for the month because you're just taking on so much work, because you're not pricing yourself adequately.
Yeah. And that's something we're not going to talk about in this interview because that's in the book and they got to go get the book to get all those tools. Like
Facts.
the actual, I can sit here and talk about like, you use these sentences and it was so cool. But like, we're talking about resources in the book. And speaking of sentences, this is my question as devil's advocate, right? Like, this is my annoying question where I have to go back to like my journalism training and just ask you the fucking question that I hate asking. But you use the word hustle in the book and it drives me nuts. I fucking hate that word. Right. Like the moment I saw, I think there's like a section called hustle, and I was like, ah, fuck. Now I want to throw this book against the wall. But then I kept reading, and the way that you define hustle is unleashing your confidence, fierce ambition, and sassy charm to create wealth like a true queen. I feel like saying like a true fucking queen, but I'm quoting you, and that's not what you said, but that's how I would have written it. And I was like, ha, yes, that is a different definition of hustle. And I like that. And so my question to you is, how do we do that? How do we unleash that wealth building queen without the burnout that is usually associated with hustle? Because I
Yeah.
know that you are brilliant at unleashing that money making queen, but you are far from burnt out, sis. This
No,
ain't
I'm definitely not, and I will say that I know what it is to hustle in the way that most people think about it, because, for some, I think for most entrepreneurs, there's going to be that season where you are juggling all the things. You're juggling the corporate job, you're juggling the side hustle, you're juggling the family. You're like, oh my God, when am I supposed to sleep? How am I going to go to the gym? So there is sacrifice that is required to build, but it should not be the modus operandi of like, this is how we're going to operate for the eternal, existence that I'm here on planet Earth. The whole point of doing what we do as wealth builders is to buy back our time, to give ourselves space, because these are not things that we saw modeled. We did not see our mothers having restful lives. We did not see them having the option to say, you know what? I want to stay home with the kids because I have passive income streams that allow me to earn 10K a month, whatever. I have rental income, I have this, that, right? And so I think it's up to us to like redefine what the hustle looks like, because that is in our DNA as immigrants, as first gen. Like, we know how to make shit happen. We know how to be resourceful. We know how to create opportunities where none exist. We need to harness that ability to be resilient and use it to create the freedom. That's been the part that's been lacking. And so for me, the hustle looks like, I, in the beginning of my journey, was very intentional about, I don't want to build a business that relies 100% on me having to show up for every dollar. And that is going to look like having multiple income streams, some that require more time and energy than others. And it also is a diversification of those income streams. So you might see me here as a podcaster, as an author, but I'm also an Airbnb host, right? So I have that. I'm also an investor in companies and the stock market. I am also a consultant when I choose to be. I also have a blog that earns income. And so that has been the way that I've hustled, but that hustle has set me up to now I can live a life where I literally can opt in and out of work. And that's what I want people to understand. Like, the hustle should not be the default. It should be the tool that you use to harness all the energy that you can to create a foundation that then gives you that space to rest and enjoy the fruits of your labor. Because if we're going to be out here stressed out and, all that, well, then what the hell was the point? We already know what that looks like. We're not trying to replicate that.
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm going to go stress out, I'm going to go stress out in corporate and then I get all the perks, right? Quote unquote, of being in
Facts.
corporate. and I'll stress out there. We're not going to be out here sacrificing all that we do, which you mentioned earlier. We're talking about somebody matching your 401k and health insurance and all these things. I can't do that. I can't do all that and stress. Right?
No, it's
Like,
not cute,
that's not
nobody
cute.
likes to see a burnt out woman out here, like, it's not the goal.
That's not the vibe. And so that brings me to another question, going back to, being immigrants and first generation Latinas that are the first wealth builders in our line, right? There's an element, I think, and you touched on this a little bit earlier. There's an element of guilt that happens. There's an element of guilt when you break past that. I feel like for everybody it's at a different income point, but like there's a point when you're like, I can breathe, and then you can start, bringing mom with you on vacations and paying her way. You can start doing certain things for your family, but then like you said, you go back home, or you go, you talk to your aunt or your uncle and they're struggling, and the guilt that is associated with, man, I'm doing so good and my people aren't.
Yeah.
This is a two-part question. One, how do we manage that guilt, knowing that, but I do want to still be wealthy because my kids deserve to be wealthy. I want to be able to leave my kids something,
Yeah.
right? And where do we create the healthy boundaries of, I worked to get here, and while I may choose, for example, to help somebody like my mom or whatever, none of y'all, including moms, are my responsibility.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I didn't become wealthy and strong so that I could be y'all's piggy bank.
Mhm.
So, how do we overcome the guilt and then also create those boundaries?
Yeah. This is something that I am personally navigating, and many people that I talk to who are on the other side, if you will, are also navigating. And it's not easy. I think this is also another opportunity that therapy is very helpful for navigating these feelings, because there's a lot that comes with, being the one to quote unquote make it. But I like to remind myself that the foundation that I am establishing now as a first generation wealth builder is only as stable as I create it to be, because there is nobody else to fall back on. And so if I'm not ensuring that my proverbial oxygen mask is on first, it's going to be much easier to disrupt that foundation if I'm not having the boundaries that I need to have in place to make sure like I'm good before I can extend help. And so, one of the things that I talk about in the book is this idea of a family emergency fund, which was introduced to me by a Puerto Rican woman of color, Latina CFP, which is very hard to find. And I was talking to her about, I want to be able to extend financial support to my family as my parents get older and they're going to retire. And I know what their financial situation is like. And I know that they're going to need that support. So, what's the best way for me to go about that? And she was just like, well, you set aside money to go on vacation, right? You set aside money to cover your deductible for your car insurance. Why don't you set aside money for your family? And it
Mm,
was just like, duh, if my family's going to be on my budget, I need to be doing that the same way that I would for any other financial priority that I have. And so that for me has been a really great way to put boundaries around the level of support that I can provide, because I have the physical number literally in front of me, right? I know what's in the family emergency fund and what type of support can I extend safely without jeopardizing my other goals. I have a separate emergency fund for myself. I have my investment accounts that are earmarked for myself. And it's easy to offer that support when you have those boundaries. And I think it's also important to understand what is the situation with your family, because that level of support can look very different just depending on what the circumstances are. Maybe they don't need a monthly allowance, if you will, but maybe you want to make sure that they have stable housing. And so instead of deciding that you're going to give them X amount of money per month, you're going to set aside money to buy a rental property, maybe a duplex or something, and you're going to use that to house your parents and rent the other unit to supplement income, right? So there's just a lot of different ways that we can be creative about offering that support without sabotaging your own financial goals. But I think the most important thing is having realistic conversations about what the situation is, and B, putting boundaries around that support so that when somebody asks you, you know confidently what you can say yes and no to. And unfortunately, sometimes it is going to require some difficult conversations that go something like, Right now, I'm not in a position to be able to extend help because I am working on these specific goals. But once I get to this place, I will be more than happy to be able to offer that support to you in a way that makes us both feel like, we're contributing in the best way possible. And maybe it's not going to be you give them a specific amount of money, but you're going to cover a bill and you know that your money is going towards that purpose. It just requires really honest and difficult conversations. That's just what it is.
It's almost like you're a professional at this point. It's almost like you know exactly what you're talking about. It's almost like you've done this before.
The experience trumps education 100%. And that's why I'm a big fan of folks who, teach from a place of lived experience, because I feel like it just really resonates a lot more with people than just, somebody who like quote unquote got a finance degree. And it's like, okay, you're spitting shit out of a book, but like what real world experience do you have that can relate to my lived experience?
100%. And I also think that that's one of the reasons, and you mentioned on this earlier too, why it matters to have women like us
Mm,
in the millionaire status, why it matters because we can share the experience and the paths and tools from a completely different angle than the white guy who had it easier to get there, or even the
right.
white girl who had it easier to get there.
Started from the
Nothing
bottom.
against
Now
the
we're
white
here.
guys. Yeah, nothing against the white guys or the white girls, but it's a different path followed. It's a completely different experience, you
It
know?
is.
And so we've talked a lot about your incredibleness and your book and money and all the things, but I'm a girl and I want to gossip. Tell me about your wedding, girl, because you just got engaged and I was so excited. And I'm
I
like,
did.
oh my God,
I
like your
did.
wedding. What kind of dress are you gonna wear? Are you gonna have it here in Puerto Rico? Like, what's going on? Give me something.
I haven't even really thought about it because this was honestly like such a big surprise. And it's funny because, one of the unexpected life events that had a really big impact on this book was me getting a divorce while I was writing this book. Right.
Oof.
And so the chapter on love and money that I included in there was not even a part of the original manuscript. And it was because of navigating a divorce that I realized like how important it is for us to talk to women, especially like women who are building wealth, about protecting all that hard work, because we are literally the first generation of women that have access to these wealth building tools. If you think about your grandmothers couldn't have a credit card, couldn't buy a house without, abuelo's name on it. Like this shit is crazy. This is a whole different world. I say all the time, I'm like, we women of color wealth builders have white man problems now. Okay. And we need to be operating in a whole different set of circumstances and mindset because we're out here building whole ass empires that need to be protected. And so, just a little side note about, how important those conversations are when it comes to relationships and money. But yeah, my, coming out of a divorce and going through all of that, I never imagined getting married again. But I also said, like, if I do, it's going to be to somebody who's like really gets it, who just understands I am a powerful woman. I am a woman who does not need a man. And so if I choose to be with you, it's not for anything that I'm going to gain like financially or anything like that. It's going to be because you're a person that I can see myself spending the rest of my life with. And so yeah, I got engaged a couple, what was it, like a week ago or something? And it's been so incredible to see everybody who's followed my journey and followed the divorce and all of the stuff that has gone on in my life in the past 5 years. For it's like another source of inspiration for people where I get to share this other aspect of my life and give hope to a lot of people who maybe have gone through the same situation or who feel like, if I'm a successful woman, am I ever going to find a man who's like not intimidated by all that success? And I promise you there's like still good guys out here, despite what the internet will tell you, despite what all your like potentially disillusioned single friends will tell you. You just have to be very intentional, about what you're allowing into your space and know that you deserve that shit. You deserve that shit the same way you deserve to be wealthy, you deserve to be loved well. And you deserve to find a partner who is going to be your biggest cheerleader and not your biggest, deterrent.
I love to hear that. And I also, like it's what you say about knowing that you deserve that too,
Yeah.
and about not allowing yourself to be influenced by all your disillusioned single friends, right? You
Yes.
don't know what kind of choices that they're making, or maybe you
Exactly.
do. Maybe you do see the choices, but like where are you going to meet these people and what kind of standards have you set for yourself and what kind of, previous dating trauma are you allowing into the decision making of your new dating?
That
What kind of
part.
shit are you thinking you're going to put up with and not put up with? And where is your margin for flexibility if the love is just so great, but XYZ isn't, right? And
Mhm.
so I feel like we need to have the same kind of clarity when it comes to love and finding love and dating that you say we need to have with our money, which is
It's so true.
100% accurate.
When we set boundaries with any aspect of our lives, right? When you get very good at saying, nope, that's not for me. And that could be a job, that could be a person, that could be an environment. Like there's some ripple effect that happens when we just are unapologetically in pursuit of what we know we deserve and refuse to settle for less. You will not settle for that bullshit job that is not paying you enough. You will not settle for that bullshit landlord who's trying to charge you to live more there when it's like, what have you done to fix this place? I don't think so. There's just going to be all types of ripple effects that you see in your life, and you will accept a lot less bullshit.
I love that. I love it. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your time. I know is priceless and your wisdom and for putting so much love and real tools into Financially Lit because it is a true transformational book from somebody who reads from a lot of authors, from somebody who interviews a lot of authors. I know that there is love, practicality, and just real shit that is in this book. And so we get both sides. Like we get the Jannese, we get the love, we get the story, but then we also get like tools, real actionable, change your life, stop fucking around and do it tools. And I love that. I love that.
Thank you so much.
One last question. What's next for you?
Ooh, well, I guess I got to plan a whole ass wedding. That's number one. But I've been now in this entrepreneurial game for 11 years and full time for 3, going on 4, and I'm ready to continue to enjoy the fruits of my labor. I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, there can be this almost endless chase of like, what's next? And one thing I've gotten really good at asking myself in the past year or so is like, what is enough?
Mm,
And that can look like from an income perspective, from a project and work perspective. And I've defined my enough. I've definitely reached my enough. And so I'm ready to live more and work a little less.
I love that. And that's it. That's all I'm going to say. We're just going to end this episode right here because that was fucking perfect. There's no closing I can give to that. That's not great. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks so much.
One of my favorite topics is money. And it's one of my favorite topics, not just because I love making money, but because I feel like as women and as Latina entrepreneurs, there's a lot that we still need to unpack about money, about making money, about investing with money, about our pricing, about all things financials. And so, one of my favorite money experts is what I like to call a whole ass person, right? The person that you can talk to and get the background story. In other words, the part of the human experience that led her to the financial and entrepreneurial greatness that we all admire as her followers and clients and fans. And you know how deeply this resonates with me because here inside Seizing Happy, we believe that your business is a reflection of you, right? And so on today's episode of the Chats with GiGi podcast, we have Jannese Torres that is going to be joining us. She is the author of Financially Lit, a modern Latina's guide to level up your dinero and become financially poderosa. If you don't know her, you got to find her. You got to follow her at Yo Quiero Dinero podcast. We're going to have all of her contact information in the show notes so you can connect with her. And you must read this book. I know I bring a lot of authors on here, but I am very selective about those authors. I don't bring anybody on this show whose book I have not read. I don't bring anybody who is an author on this show if I don't truly feel that their book is actionable, powerful, and has a true message to be delivered to my listeners because I ain't going to waste y'all's time, right? And like people don't pay for these interviews. And so if I'm going to spend my time having a conversation with somebody, it's got to bring you value and it's got to bring me value and it's got to bring joy all around to everybody involved, right? And so that's one of the reasons that I am so excited to have Jannese on the show because I've been a guest on her podcast, the Yo Quiero Dinero podcast, and it was so much fun to be on the other side of the microphone, so to speak, where she was interviewing me. But right now and I've been thinking about having her on the show forever. But I feel like, God's timing is divine. And right now was the perfect time to bring her on because she's got her book going on, because she just got engaged. So, of course, we're going to have some engagement questions and some wedding planning questions. But more importantly, because she's at a level, and she talks about this in her interview, where she has found a sense of completion almost, right? And the level of business and expansion where she's at. And that is not something that I have found for myself or that I have discussed on the show before. And so I'm really, really excited to bring her on specifically at this point in her life when there is so much culminating, so much happening, so much growth and so much expansion, but also where she's at a point where it's like, this is good, right? I may not necessarily want another hill to climb. And I feel like that's exciting to hear, but also a little triggering for some of us where it's like, what do you mean? What do you mean you're not going to find another ginormous mountain to climb? And so this interview is so much fun and so exciting. And I am so happy that I was able to chat with her and bring her on the show and that this was like the perfect timing to do it. So without further ado, y'all, the Yo Quiero Dinero podcast host and published author, Jannese Torres.